living by the Scout Oath and Law since I was 10 and a half years old. And it's an important part of who I am today. And I have also taken to heart the Boy Scout motto, be prepared. At its core, it means to plan for the unexpected, to have a plan B, to be ready for whatever comes your way. And to me, it's also the motto that sets the stage to teach Scouts how to be self-reliant. And for me, it's a way of life. I am one of those guys who tries to do everything myself before calling a professional. And back in the day before YouTube, I had that Time Life series of everything on home repair. I would do that, and I would ask my buddies for advice before taking on a project. And most of the time, I was successful and everything worked out fine. There's a sense of accomplishment and enjoyment that comes from feeling that I did it myself. But looking back, I wonder if deep down, I was just one of those guys who had a hard time accepting help. When I was younger, I looked at asking for help as a sign of weakness, and I thought that I had to do it myself, or that I should do it myself. But now, as I'm getting a little older, and hopefully becoming a little wiser, I'm beginning to see it differently. Seeking help, being dependent on someone, can be a good thing. It is something we need. For fundamentally, we are a dependent people. We depend on each other and all of creation for everything we need. And our dependence starts off early, from birth, because we need our mothers and other caregivers to feed us and to keep us clean and to protect us. We need this much longer than any other offspring in nature. And it is amazing to me how much we all depend on creation for survival. If you think about it, all of creation is dependent on making things work. Remember those lessons from school on how we need plants to provide oxygen for us to breathe, and how plants need our carbon dioxide for its life. It's a cycle that is created by God, our Creator, to remind us of how much everything is dependent on living together. It goes to show that we need to take care of all of God's creation in order to provide for our future and for future generations. We have to help each other. But even with this knowledge of how nature and creation works, we still want to be independent, and we think we can do it all ourselves. I was walking through the bookstore the other day, and I was looking for a book on church leadership, and I couldn't help to notice how many self-help books were on the shelves. Go figure, the self-help books right next to the religious books. Anyway, there were twice as many books on how to improve just about anything that is wrong with yourself, as to opposed to reading the topics on God and religion. So I went home and I Googled how big the book sales were for each of them. And sure enough, the self-help book industry had about $776 million in sales in 2017, compared to the 416 for religious book sales. The takeaway for me was that we are a searching people, and maybe we're searching in the wrong place. This got me thinking about self-help and our faith life. So I have a question for you, and I want you to keep your answer to yourself. Does it say in the Bible that God helps those who help themselves? Does God help those who help themselves? If you answered yes, you're not alone. 1 in 8 people believe that this statement is in the Bible. But really, it isn't. It's a sentiment that can be traced back to Aesop's fable about God's helping And that fable goes something like this. A wagoner was once driving a heavy load on a very muddy way. At last he came to the part of the road where the wheels sank halfway into the mire. The more the horses pulled, the deeper sank the wheels. So the wagoner threw down his whip and knelt down and prayed to Hercules the strong. "Oh, Hercules, help me in this hour of distress," he said. But Hercules appeared and said to him, "Oh man, don't sprawl there. Get up and put your shoulder to the wheel. The gods help them that help themselves." Now this form of the fable was actually popularized by Benjamin Franklin in 1757 in Poor Richard's Almanac, when he wrote, "Let us hearken good advice and something that may be done for us. God helps them that helps themselves." Now I admit this does sort of sound like a proverb that we might find in the Bible. But if anything, that statement teaches the exact opposite about the way we should think about it. For God has shown over and over through the Bible that God is with those who seek Him first, those who rely on God for everything. For example, we read in the book of Proverbs in chapter 8, verse 26, "Those who trust in their own reasoning are fools, but those who walk in the wisdom are kept safe." Wisdom in this passage can be described as walking in the ways of God. Walking in the ways of God. Now that leads us to today's reading in the Psalms, where the psalmist is celebrating how God has been with Israel and has delivered them from their enemies. The psalmist was looking back over the history of Israel, of how they escaped from Egypt through the Red Sea, and how Jonah was swallowed by the whale and saved later. The writer is calling for Israel to shout out in praise of how God was with them when they were attacked, and how they were blessed when they were not handed over to their enemies, and escaped and are now free. He was helping them to see how their help came from the Lord, our Creator of heaven and earth. Now, rulers and nations throughout the ages have claimed that God was on their side. And sometimes it appears that way, but that there have been others when that claim of God being on their side has been misused. And when we see it misused, it shows up in some crazy things happen. We can look back on how nations justified wars, slavery, racism, sexism, and terrorism, all with the claim that God was on their side of what they were doing. And if we tighten the scope in of our view just a little and take a look at this from an individual level, we see that even today we have small groups of people and individuals claiming that God is on their side and using this as part of their tactic in pushing their particular point of view, political politics, and their view of the way the world should be. But in doing this, they're trying to push out other opinions. And taking such a hardline approach seems extreme to me. Because by making these claims about God being on their side, they are taking power from God that was never given to them. I read a story this week about Abraham Lincoln. It was during the Civil War, and Lincoln was meeting with a group of ministers for a prayer breakfast. One of the ministers said, "Mr. President, let us pray that God is on our side." Lincoln's response to that minister showed far greater insight. "No, gentlemen, let us pray that we are on God's side." This type of shift in mindset is one that is greatly needed today. Friends, we need to turn our focus from wanting God to be on our side to us wanting to be on God's side. We need to pray and discern to see if our thoughts and actions that we are trying to put God on our side, or are we seeking God's will and being on God's side in our lives? By striving to be on God's side, we should find ourselves in line with God's instruction for how we should live, how we should love those around us, and how we should be taking care of all of God's creation. By aligning ourselves on God's side, we are also moving from an entitlement behavior about God to a sense of great gratitude for God. This would bring us to a deeper sense of gratitude for what the Creator has already done for us. A thankful gratitude for such a beautiful creation that we live in. A humbling gratitude of God, knowing that we have been entrusted to take care of His creation the best way we can. A gratitude for God that we have all of the resources that we need to live. A gratitude for God in being able to take comfort in knowing that we are on God's side. That we are on God's side because we are a part of God's creation. Will you pray with me? God, make the words that we have heard a living word in the core of our being. Help us to put our faith in no other power than the power of your saving love. Make us agents of your love, showing others the presence of your love and grace. Through Jesus Christ, enable us to be at peace with one another and to be salt of the earth with the power of your peace. We ask all of this in Jesus'